Is Sonic IDW canon? This debate has been reignited recently, ever since Tangle and Whisper have been announced to be coming to Sonic Racing Crossworlds. As both a Sonic fan and a comic fan, I thought I'd give my 2 cents. Now, for those unfamiliar, Sonic IDW is a comic series that began in early 2018 and builds off of the events of Sonic Forces. The comic calls back to the events of that game on several occasions during the early parts of its run, and its main villain of the first arc, Neo Metal Sonic, is a direct follow-up to a loose thread from Sonic Forces. This strong connection to the games led many people to wonder, is this part of the game continuity? On October 1st, 2018, Ian Flynn said on the Bumblekast that IDW Sonic was not canon to the games, and was instead simply inspired by them. He said specifically that the comics were kind of a what if this happened after Sonic Forces. So IDW isn't canon, case closed. Well, not really. Since then, direction changes have been going on in SEGA. There has been an active push to unify the Sonic brand, and as such, the canon. By Ian's own words,
Izuka-san says he wants to bring the various forms of Sonic media closer together. Mm-hmm. And I have made it clear that the comics follow the lead of the games. So as long as there's no contradictions anywhere, we're good.
So when people say that, say, for example, like IDW is canon to the games now, would you argue against that?
I would not argue against it, no.
As always, Sonic lore is constantly changing depending on what the higher-ups want. For example, social media team members have confirmed, when asked, that Tangle and Whisper are just as canon as any other Sonic character. This would seem pretty conclusive, but if they were willing to go back on their word from 2018, who's to say that in 8 years they won't just say, oh, never mind, this isn't canon? So let's look at different pieces of Sonic media to try and deduce whether or not we can prove IDW is canon or not within the lore itself. In the Twitter TikTok takeover for Sonic Superstars, there was a cheeky reference to Dr. Starline, an original villain from that comic series.
The last time I let a fan near me, it was a massive headache. Never again! What was his name? Starbies? Shoreline?
Starline?
No, that can't be it. Either way, good luck finding another evil dictator to fawn over, Spiro.
Now, of course, take anything said in the Twitter takeovers with a grain of salt. They are supposed to be comedic interactions between the official cast and the fans. But they are under scrutiny to make sure that they aren't doing anything that would go against the brand. So, the fact the Gamecast were allowed to reference him, though not decisive proof on its own, is further fuel for the fire. Speaking of Sonic Superstars, the Fang the Hunter IDW miniseries was specifically made to tie in with the events of that game. Now, why does this matter? The Archie Comics had tie-ins to the games as well. A comic having a tie-in doesn't immediately mean that it is part of the same continuity. Some of them even had to go out of their way to emphasize that they weren't part of the comic continuity and were instead a direct tie-in with the games. Well, the Fang the Hunter miniseries actually features the Warp Topaz, the item Dr. Starline has in the IDW Comics. Since this comic is so intrinsically linked to the games, it would seem weird they would be allowed to include an IDW exclusive item unless they were part of the same continuity. But so far, these have been some pretty loose connections. Let's get some bigger examples. One of the biggest points of evidence people have used to say that IDW is part of the game continuity is the direct acknowledgement of Tangle the Lemur in Sonic Frontiers.
I bet Tangle would love climbing around these ruins.
And recently in Sonic Racing Crossworlds, there have been references to the IDW comics, even if only indirectly.
You will not get in the way of my conquests again, boy. Whether in a race or in warfare, my pride demands victory.
Although this could technically be a reference to Team Sonic Racing, it is more likely a reference to Sonic IDW, specifically the end of the Metal Virus.
Oh, you're a sneaky one. You won't creep up on me. I'm lashing out in all directions all the time. Hiya, hiya, hiya!
He's even more unhinged than the last time we faced off. I'll need to be extra careful when dealing with him this time.
Now, unless you're going to try and convince me that Sonic Dash, or the Sonic calendars in which Shadow is part of a band, is canon, the only time Espio has ever battled against Zaz would be during the Metal Virus. Even the specific word choice of calling Espio sneaky feels like it could very easily be a reference to the fact that Espio beat him by turning invisible.
You shirk your royal duties to partake in racing? Let my father conquer your world, and you'll be free to play all you like.
I brought peace to my world, and I'm enjoying some time away. Or do you wish me to unleash my full fury against you and the Doctor?
Blaze saying that her dimension has been brought to peace and she's enjoying some time off is most likely a reference back to Sonic IDW's annual from 2022, in which it comes to Blaze's attention that she has defeated all of the robot pirates in her dimension. Her dimension is at peace. And after some convincing, she decides to treat herself to a well-deserved holiday in Sonic's world. At the time of recording, this has been her status quo in the comic. So, for them to give the same explanation in Sonic Racing Cross Worlds of why she's here, it would lead further proof that these are indeed the same continuity. Now, because I consider myself to be a fair judge, let's acknowledge some points against IDW being part of the main continuity. Tangle isn't the only character that gets confirmed to be part of the main canon in Sonic Frontiers. Styx does as well, and we don't assume that Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric is canon now, do we? Now, it should be noted that Sonic Frontiers was not Styx's first time being referenced in a modern Sonic material. Styx made a cameo in Sonic's 25th anniversary manga, and was a playable character in Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. However, though there's nothing saying the manga couldn't be canon, if we were going to try and argue that she could be canon because of her appearance in the Olympic Games, you would also have to imply that the entire Mario canon is canon to Sonic, which is an entirely different can of worms that I am not going to touch right now. As for the references in Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, although I fully believe they are in fact references to IDW, they are technically vague enough that they could be written off as similar but completely separate events that are not connected to IDW. So, what's my closing verdict? Is Sonic IDW canon? Well, if you ask me, yes, I think there is more than enough evidence that you could argue that IDW is canon, and people working on the games have been saying that it is canon at the point of me recording this. However, I do also think they are purposefully keeping the comics at an arm's length, both so that people who don't read the comics won't be completely lost, and so if the IDW comics go the way of Archie, they can silently be written off as non-canon. So, in the end, although I do believe they are canon at the point of me recording this in 2025, there is a possibility that at some point in the future they could be removed from canon. After all, they were originally intended to not be directly canon to the games, but worked into canon perfectly fine, and since they were trying to connect the brand more, they decided to add them in. Which I think is great. I love that the games are slowly starting to acknowledge the comics. For decades, the Sonic games refused to acknowledge their long-running comics. So the fact that we're at a point where the games are starting to acknowledge the comics, and comic original characters are appearing in the games, I see that as a big win for us comic fans. However, even with them being acknowledged, it still isn't essential reading. You can easily ignore the comics if you don't want them to be part of the canon. And as such, if you want them to be part of the canon, they work seamlessly in. So that's my stance. If you want them to be canon, they can be canon. If you don't want them to be canon, they don't have to be canon. At the end of the day, canon is just a word. It's what it means to you that matters. So what do you think of this debate? Please respectfully leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm ComicFan13, and I hope you have a good day.